to the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. You know I hate talking about this kind of stuff because I don't like to talk about this stuff. It's pro wrestling. I'm supposed to be escaping the BS of the normal world, but it's increasingly found its way into the wrestling world, and that topic today is the comments from Big Swole and Tony Khan's response to them, and the overall question about diversity in all elite wrestling. Now, before we get into that, I want to remind you guys that you should be diversifying your portfolio by investing in stocks and in cryptocurrency. Now, one easy way you can do that is by using Webull. Webull is now giving away something like 5 or 6 stocks for free for just signing up and depositing a little bit of money. So you can check that out. Those stocks could be worth anywhere from like $500 to $2,300. So it's worth giving it a shot. It's basically like getting free money, you know, scratching off. I mean, let's say you get 5 free stocks and they're each worth $5, but that's $25 you could cash out for free if you wanted to. So check that out in the description box below, along with some of the other affiliate links I have down for you. Get yourself some free stuff. And now let's talk about this very, very controversial topic. So again, I think it's interesting to point out, and it's important to point out that what Big Swole was saying, and she had a lot to say. Now, initially a month ago, she had talked about how she and AEW had come to an amicable parting of the ways, and she had some things in her life, and she had been injured, and they had paid her and kept her on the roster, but they didn't renew her contract. She didn't want to stay there, so they left. Now, over the past couple of days, that tune's changed a little bit, where she kind of called AEW out on its lack of diversity, talking about a lack of diversity in some of the executives. I think this is probably more directed towards Kenny Omega, because he's the one that supposedly is booking the women's division, which that's a whole other topic. Talking about how there aren't a lot of voices of people of color or diversity in the executive and the planning phase of AEW, because it's a lot of white people. We can talk about that in a second. And she also talked about the lack of structure in AEW. That's a little bit Wild West, which can be a problem from time to time, but I'll talk about that in a bit. And just a lot of different topics. She essentially called out a lot of things. Now, a lot of people have jumped onto this on social media. Some people I've seen comments from people like, yes, and the Latino stars don't get enough shine, and we should see more Asian faces on AEW and all of this stuff. And there are a couple points where I agree with the Swole side, and there are a couple of parts where I agree with the Khan side, and then there's kind of what I really think about this whole thing, and we'll talk about that at the end. On the Swole side, what I'll give is there's one particular wrestler that I think that this applies to. It's Scorpio Sky. Scorpio Sky was there from the beginning. He should be upper mid-card, lower main event right now, given how long he's been there, but still, even with the Men of the Year thing, not quite there yet. It still seems like we're missing some piece, and he should be a lot farther along than he is. So there is some validation in that, but I think probably there are 2 things involving Swole that I think are big outliers that you could kind of cherry pick and go, yeah, this validates her point. One of them being that in 2021, and I haven't seen anybody else make this point, but I think some people are going to make it too. In 2021, all the major North American companies had a black man as the world champion. WWE had Big E and Bobby Lashley. Impact Wrestling had Moose. Ring of Honor had Jonathan Gresham to close out the Ring of Honor era recently. AEW had Hangman Page and Kenny Omega as world champion, 2 white guys. So you could look at that and go, see, right there, look, all the other companies had black men as world champion last year, except for AEW and MLW. But you could break that point. Another point that you could make, and that I noticed, is when Big Swole started in AEW back in 2019, 2020, it was about the same time that WWE was pushing Bianca Belair. And I remember saying at the time that Bianca Belair and Big Swole were kind of similar, not exactly similar, but they're similar kind of characters at least. But I think Bianca Belair was a little bit better, but I thought Big Swole had a lot of upside, and I was really interested in Big Swole. They gave her the feud with Britt Baker that went on forever and a day. And I thought, yeah, Big Swole, she's got a cool entrance theme song. She's got a cool name. She's got an interesting look. And I think what might be weighing on some people's minds is that if you now look at where Bianca Belair has gotten to in that time, that she's main event at WrestleMania, made history as being not only the first black woman to main event WrestleMania, but being part of the first 2 black women to main event of WrestleMania, and won the championship. We can talk about SummerSlam some other time, but Bianca Belair did accomplish that, whereas Big Swole, on the other hand, who was almost her kind of mirror opposite in AEW, was on Dark and Dark Elevation, wrestling 3-minute matches. So there is something to be said for that, and AEW has yet to have a black singles champion that I can think of off the top of my head. So there are some things there that it does seem like there are some lack of diversity issues in AEW, but let's kind of look at the other side of that argument. The other side of that argument is what Tony Khan tweeted out, which was not a smart tweet. Let me put that out there right away. Tony Khan then went on to say, well, he's a person of color, and so is Megan, whoever that is. I think that's his girlfriend or whoever. I'm not sure. I don't follow that stuff. But then he went on to list a number of AEW's wrestlers who are people of color, and that they've all had win streaks. Some of them have been champions, et cetera, et cetera. But then he had to add in the part that Big Swole, he didn't think she was very talented in the ring. That was very petty, juvenile, and unnecessary. And it goes further to this whole perception that Tony Khan is a money mark. He already has that perception because when you look at the post-match, post-event stuff from AEW after Dynamite and Rampage, he comes in the ring and he's hopping up around and clapping his hands and, you know, just being, and I hate using the word mark, but he's acting like a dork, I'll say that, when he's in the ring sometimes, and I just look at it like, Tony, stop doing that stuff. And he's got a bit of a Trump problem when it comes to tweeting. He tends to reactively tweet instead of thinking about it, instead of thinking, hey, I am the guy in charge of this Major League Wrestling company. Perhaps I should not act like a internet troll and act more like an executive who's leading a major multi-$100 million company. Maybe I should act like that. So somebody needs to take his Twitter away from him. I don't know if it's his dad or Megan or Kenny or the Bucks, or somebody needs to grab a hold of him and say, look, dude, stop tweeting, responding to people tweeting like this. This is not the way you should handle it as the executive face of the company. It's not a good look. But are there any merits to the other side of the coin from Big Swole's side? And that's where I kind of come down in a little bit. Now, again, as I pointed out before, there are some very glaring things that you can look at. Again, that World Championship scene in 2021, with AEW being one of the few North American Major League Wrestling companies that did not have a black man as world champion. You can point to that, but at the same time, I'm thinking about AEW's roster. Is there a black wrestler on the roster that I think should have been world champion instead of Kenny Omega or Hangman Adam Page, given the fact that AEW wants long-term championship reigns because that's what the fans want, and they want long-term storytelling because that's what the fans want. And I can't say that there really is anybody. Even Scorpio Sky, as high as I am on Scorpio Sky and think he should be in that position, or at least close to that position, I can't say that he should have had the title over Kenny or Hangman in 2021. Then you got to kind of think about the history and some of the, let's talk about some of the other stuff about the people of color not getting opportunities and diversity stuff. Well, speaking of Scorpio Sky, he was the first one half of the first AEW World Tag Team Champions. In fact, that whole storyline was, remember SCU? They pushed him as being the guy, the main star in SCU. They had to get out Christopher Daniels and put him in Daniels' place with Kazarian to become the first AEW Tag Team Champions. When it comes to the people talking about more Asians and more Latinos on the card, I think that okay, no. Let's remember what happened. The first AEW Women's Champion is Riho, who's a Japanese wrestler. The second AEW Women's Champion is Nyla Rose, a transgendered, I believe she's Latino or half black. She's a person of color, put it that way, and she's transgender. So, yeah, that doesn't hold up there. The Latino thing, I mean, Sammy Guevara, even though I know a lot of people see Sammy Guevara as too Americanized to be considered Latino, whatever, he's Latino. He just lost the TNT Championship after winning it from one of the most dominant wrestlers in the company, in the industry, in Miro, who was on a hot streak at the time. Sammy beat him for the TNT Championship. And let's not forget, because I saw a bunch of people writing this stuff, and they would list all the other Latino wrestlers, except for the current AEW World Tag Team Champions, who are called the Lucha Brothers, Pentagon and Phoenix, who are Mexicans, and one of them speaks Spanish instead of English. So I'm not sure, like, the match they won the tag titles against was match of the year in many people's eyes. High profile match on their biggest pay-per-view of the year in a steel cage match, and they won it from the two of the pretty white boy EVPs who are running the show in the Young Bucks. So that, I don't know about them not pushing people color thing. So let's take that aside. And let's talk about what Big Swole really talked about, which she was talking about for her people, which are my people, if we're doing those categories, black people. Well, let's look at AEW's roster of black wrestlers. So, as I mentioned, Scorpio Sky, they just got Jay Lethal in there, and I think Jay Lethal is probably going to be more of a helping out other wrestlers role as opposed to him being featured as a main event wrestler. I think that's where he is in his career right now. I could be wrong, but I don't see him as being a big main event star right now. And who else? We got Red Velvet in the women's division. We got Jade Cargill, who, how can anybody argue? Jade Cargill is the most protected wrestler in AEW. She's a big, strong, unique look, got a lot of charisma. Her wrestling is not there yet. We saw it this past week in that match with Thunder Rosa. Jade Cargill cannot wrestle a 10, 11, 12-minute match and make it interesting just yet. She'll get there. She's not there yet. On the male side, you got Will Hobbs. Hobbs isn't ready for main event spotlight, but they did put him against CM Punk in front of their largest crowd ever at the Arthur Ashe Stadium show. That's kind of a big profile spot to be in, but is Hobbs ready to be main event world champion? I don't think so. They're pushing the hell out of Dante Martin, but then some people could say, well, Dante Martin's light skinned, or I don't know if he's mixed, but he's light skinned. He's definitely light skinned. So, well, that's the reason they're pushing him. He's lighter shade, and they just hired Leo Rush. Leo Rush, who's been back and forth on his opinions about this whole topic. You got other guys in there like the Acclaimed, who are one of the most over tag teams right now. Even with Caster getting himself into trouble from some of his raps, he's still on the show. They were just featured prominently over the past couple weeks. Private Party, remember Private Party when they came in the first year? They beat the Young Bucks in that tag team tournament to knock them out of a chance to become the first AEW tag team champions. That was Private Party. So I don't know. See, this is the weird and hard thing about it. There's merit to what Big Swole is saying, that there aren't any black people in main event roles in AEW. Yet at the same time, if I'm looking at the black wrestlers in AEW, I don't think any of them outside of Scorpio Sky have built themselves up enough to be in a main event spot. And Scorpio Sky, I think, will get there. They've just had a hard time. I mean, and let's talk about the Scorpio Sky thing too. Like I said, he was the star. They featured him prominently as being the breakout starter of SCU way back in year one of AEW. Feuded against Jericho, beat Jericho, I think twice. One of the few guys to have beaten Jericho twice in AEW, along with MJF. Then that didn't really work out. They turned him heel. They put him in Men of the Year with Ethan Page. He's got Dan Lambert doing his promos for him now. They put him in a faction along with Junior Dos Santos and Jorge Masvidal, two giant names in the sports world, to feud against one of the hottest factions in AEW in the Inner Circle, led by Chris Jericho, a faction, by the way, that's also 3/5 people of color too. So I'm scratching my head sometimes at some of it doesn't make sense. But again, you go back to the overall thing that there isn't a main event black wrestler in AEW just yet. And I can see both sides of it. Which of course means in the comment section, I'm going to hear it from both sides. I don't care. There was something else Big Swole said that I didn't agree with. She was complaining about the structure of AEW and that some people aren't good at writing their own stuff and yada, yada, yada. Well, now, look, I think there's plenty between CM Punk and the Nightmare Factory and QT Marshall. They make it a point all the time to talk about how they're trying to help Arn Anderson, Jake the Snake Roberts, all these people that are great promo people, great in-ring people that are helping these young people get along, and people who have been on the indies but haven't been on national television or haven't been in front of a crowd of more than 500 people. They're trying to help these people get acclimated to now the fact that they are in front of 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 people crowds. They are in front of 800 to over 1 million people watching the show every single week, and they're trying to get these people, and the help is readily there. Plus, I kind of personally have an issue with somebody saying, well, other people are skilled at something, but I'm not skilled at that, as in writing promos and delivering promos. So I think there should be a structure where somebody should write my stuff for me. You're in the wrong company then, hun. I hate to tell you that. You belong in NXT then, because AEW, the whole point of AEW, one of their biggest selling points was they weren't going to be doing scripted promos. Wrestlers were going to be allowed to write their own stuff and be in control of their own characters. If you want to have your script written for you and be given a gimmick, then you need to go over to NXT. And I don't know if that's working too well. We've seen that sometimes hasn't worked. More times than not, that doesn't work too well. And especially, it's not going to work well if you're not good at giving promos anyway. It doesn't matter if you write them or they're scripted. If you're not good at giving promos, you're not going to be good at giving a promo. My honest opinion, back to the whole comparison between Bianca Belair and Big Swole, who were being promoted by both companies in similar fashions at the same time, Big Swole is not as good as Bianca Belair. And like I said earlier, she had a big feud, I remember distinctly, with Britt Baker, who wasn't even that over at the time herself. Britt Baker has gone on to become massively over. Red Velvet has gone on to become massively over. Jade Cargill has gone on to become massively over. They still push Nyla Rose, even though Nyla Rose, in my opinion, isn't really that good as an in-ring performer, but Nyla Rose does have a presence about her. Big Swole just never developed. And when they put her on the other shows, and even when she was hurt and injured and had her own personal issues, and they kept trying to put her on the show, people didn't seem to care. And Tony Khan is a stat guy who's looking at the stats, and he's just going, I don't see it. Plus, a lot of people have been putting up montages about Big Swole not being all that great in the ring. I don't think she's terrible. I think she's okay, but she's not a main event wrestler right now. She still has some stuff that she needs to work on. And it sounded, again, like she didn't want to work on it. They should have just put her in the main event spot. Maybe she's jealous of Jade Cargill's spot, but she's not Jade Cargill physically. She can't do what Jade Cargill does. And she's not Bianca Belair. She looked like she was going to be the Bianca Belair of AEW, but she's not as good as Bianca Belair. That's just being honest. Jade Cargill is in the finals of the TBS Championship Tournament match this coming Wednesday against Ruby Soho, which I'm kind of wondering now, because, and this is the problem with what Tony Khan tweeted out, they're now in a no-win situation, because either if Ruby Soho wins the TBS Championship on Wednesday, people are going to go, the people who want to go say this stuff and want this to be true are going to say, see, there's another case of them not promoting the black wrestler. Or if Jade Cargill does become TBS champion, then they're going to go, well, okay, but that's not enough. So you're not going to, it's a no-win situation. For any company, any company, any public person, if you're dealing with stuff like this, there's no way to win. There's no way for the AEW to win this scenario in the minds of the people that want to be angry about this. So I wouldn't even bother trying. I would stick to whatever they had booked before, whatever they were planning to do with the TBS Championship. Do not let social media sway it. If they were planning for Jade to win the championship and they have a storyline for that going forward, cool. If they were planning for Ruby Soho to win it and they got a story for Soho going forward, cool. But this does leave the main event issue. This does leave the legitimate comparison that I think is probably a problem. The fact that all the other major North American companies have black men as world champions in 2021. So how do you fix that? Well, again, AEW's roster, the black wrestlers on AEW's roster, most of them are still green. I don't think you beat Will Hobbs world champion just to say that you had a black world champion. I don't think you put Scorpio Sky as world champion just to say you had a black world champion. I think they need to develop these wrestlers, but again, none of those wrestlers I think are ready to be main event players in main event storylines with main event pushes. Then that goes, okay, well, they've got all these white guys in there, but let's look at who those guys are. We're talking about Adam Cole. We're talking about CM Punk. We're talking about Bryan Danielson. We're talking about Kenny Omega. And even Hangman Adam Page, they've been grooming him for this spot for 2 freaking years. Look, and maybe that's a bigger problem with the wrestling industry as a whole, if you want to consider it a problem, or just a feature or aspect. It's an aspect of the wrestling community as a whole, and not so much AEW. That's just kind of the problem. The only black wrestler I think that they could bring in that could fill a main event spot right now, and this may be a stretch for some people, but is Willie Mack, who was featured prominently in Lucha Underground, featured prominently in Mexican wrestling. He's featured prominently in the NWA as the former North American champion. So I think he's the only one I can think of. I mean, outside of Bobby Lashley or Big E or any of the New Day or Moose coming over to AEW, those are the only guys I think that could come in and be in an instant main. Those are the only black wrestlers that I think could come into AEW and become instant main eventers. I don't see anybody else out there like that. And that's the way the wrestling community is, because kind of a secret, guys, a lot of the wrestling community is pretty goddamn white. I mean, I'm a black guy doing wrestling YouTube. The same thing applies to wrestling YouTube. There aren't a lot of black wrestling YouTubers out here. What is it, like me, Dalexman, Shy Smart Mark, who's on JD from New York's YouTube channel, and a handful of others. Most of us are, I'm getting a couple thousand views a video. I know Dalexman gets a couple thousand views, but none of us are like where, Wrestling with Regret or Solo Monster or Wrestle Cultaholic or Wrestle Talk, where they're getting 100, 150,000 views a video. Is that because YouTube is racist? YouTube doesn't give a shit. Is it because the wrestling community is racist? I mean, there may be some of that. There are definitely some racist people that come through here. But I think more, as far as I can speak on my channel, what I'm concerned is this is a hobby for me. I don't, wrestling YouTube is like the 5th most important thing I do during the week, or the thing I spend not that much time on. I do videos when I feel like it and put them up, which, if you know anything about YouTube, is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have like a consistent schedule that helps you build an audience, and I don't do that. And I know if I want this channel to be my main job, I'd have to do that, but this channel isn't my main job, so I'm not going to get upset about it. I'm not going to go, well, I'm not as big as Cultaholic or Wrestling with Regret or Solo Monster because I'm black. I know a reason why this channel isn't 100,000 views a video, but for what I do, for somebody who kind of half-asses wrestling YouTube videos, I think I do pretty good, and I make a decent amount of money, side hustle money doing it. It pays for some bills, so I'm happy with it. And as you can tell over time, I've been trying to make improvements to my videos to make them a little bit better so I can make them a little bit more palatable and maybe get some more people in. But again, it's not a full-time gig. If I wanted to and said, okay, I'm going to go beat Cultaholic, 2022, I'm going to get more viewers than Russell Talk. I'm going to have to, you know what I'd have to do? I'd have to work day and night, every single day, get a new camera, improve things, come up with I would have to put so much work into doing it. It's not worth it for me because, again, this is not my main gig. Now, if it was my main gig, like me being a wrestler full-time, you can guarantee I would be looking to do everything I possibly can do to get up into the higher echelon of things. I do think that the issue, as far as black, and again, and we're not going to talk about Latinos and Asians because I don't think that criticism applies to them. And especially once Japan, if you think there's not enough Japanese wrestlers in AEW, wait till the travel restrictions lessen up on New Japan. You're going to be seeing a crap ton of Japanese wrestlers, probably too much. And another thing about that too, as I'm going off on a bit of a rant now, back to the wrestling ranting days, here's my rant about that little bit of stuff. Remember when they first started the women's division and it was mostly Joshis, Japanese female wrestlers, and everybody said, well, the women's division sucks. I can't relate to all these people. None of these people, I don't like any of these. Kenny Omega has a Japanese girl fetish and all that crap, and everybody shit on the division. Okay, so now that they've moved out of that, now there's not enough Japanese female wrestlers on the show. They made Nyla Rose the second AEW women's champion. And a lot of people thought she got there just because she was transgendered, because she wasn't really that good in the ring, but now it's like, oh, well, there's not enough diversity in there. Well, Nyla Rose is still prominently featured. I don't, like the whole thing, again, the Lucha Brothers are the current AEW World Tag Team Champion. I don't see that stuff. I don't see it, and I think it's just, I think you can cherry pick anything. Like I cherry picked the world title situation. That's the reason I did it, is to give an example of how you can cherry pick something. It can be true, but it's not the whole story. And to be fair, critically of them, they brought this on themselves by, in the beginning, especially Cody and Brandy, being so wokey woke with the way they promoted their company, that we're going to be about diversity. When you put yourself in that position, as time goes on, you're asking for it when somebody's not happy, and it's going to be hard when you got this many people on the show and only 3 hours a week to put them on TV. Somebody's not going to get what they feel they should have gotten in AEW. They're going to go, I thought AEW was a land of opportunity. Ask Brian Cage about this. And then they're going to go, well, you guys said you were diverse, but you know, we're the black champ. They set themselves up for this whole thing, to be honest with you. And now they got to deal with the consequences of it, which is why you don't bring politics into wrestling. That is the whole reason why, because then you put your foot in your mouth. Tony Khan's tweet was boneheaded. Big Swole, I don't think there's anybody right in this whole thing. I think at the end of the day, this is a stupid topic. But that's just my thoughts on it. I want to know what you guys think. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Are you on Big Swole's side? Let your comments be known. Do you think that she's a little stretching it and trying to compensate for the fact that she wasn't as good as she thinks she should have been promoted as in the company, and that there are plenty of examples of not only people of color, but also black women who are in very prominent roles in AEW, including one of the vice presidents, Brandy Rhodes. But whatever you think. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Now, please, in the comment section, and I know I'm asking for a lot here, but try to be intelligent. I don't need to see any racism. I don't need to see you guys going after each other. And I certainly, as some of the people have found out, if you start coming after me, I don't know why you think this is going to stand, but you can try to do it. You're just going to get banned from the channel, but, you know, whatever. Knock yourselves out. Just try to keep it somewhat a conversation that somebody over the age of 12 would have about race. But I want to know what you guys think. I'm really scared to open up the can of worms on this one, but let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Until then, I will see you guys for more news, rumors, and commentary here on the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. Have a good day.